So this morning, we have the professor, Chris Freiberg.
Thanks, Kirby. Hey, have any of you guys seen this bumper sticker before? I see some heads nodding. Yeah? You guys seen that bumper sticker before? It's been a number of years since I've seen this bumper sticker, but these 4 words, real men love Jesus. Real men love Jesus. So 4 words, you got the word love in there. We know that the word love and men, you don't typically see those 2 words together. And then real men. So today we're going to break this down and check out each of these words and what does this really mean? And when we look at the word love, we know that love is a noun. We also know it's a verb. So when we look at the word love as a verb, we see that there's action here. It's about action. It's about doing something, right? And so if there's evidence for love, there's evidence that something's been done. So that's what we're trying to connect today. And there's evidence by our actions. In fact, when you look at what Jesus said about love, he said that if you love me, speaking of himself, if you love me, you'll keep my commands. And so Jesus said this, and John recorded it in his gospel, John 14:15. So from this, we know that there's evidence of our love by our actions. Take a listen to this. Pastor John Bloom talks about this topic this way. He says that God made us to wear our love on our sleeves. He wired us to serve what we treasure. And how we love ourselves is evident by how we serve ourselves, for good or for evil. So how we love our spouse, our children, our friends, or pastors, coworkers, or even our pets is evident by how we serve or we neglect them. So whether we love God or money, it's evident by how we serve or neglect one or the other. In the long run, we cannot fake who or what we really serve. Take mind of that other 4-letter F word there, fake, because when we look at this, we're talking about real versus fake. So we're not about being fake men, we're about being real men. So John Bloom continues to go on. He says, so how do we know if we love Jesus? Well, by what we consistently, not perfectly, but consistently do and don't do. So these next 3 sentences, he says, you may want to write these down. You got a pen and paper, you might want to write these down. I found these to be very profound. The first sentence, he says, we know what love is by what love does. We know what love is by what love does. The next sentence here, he's got 2 more sentences in this quote. The second one here is, all lovers of Jesus refuse to walk in persistent, conscious disobedience to him. So we're seeing some definitions here. I'll say it again. All lovers of Jesus refuse to walk in persistent, conscious disobedience to him. And then his last sentence. Our faith-empowered obedience in public and private places, our faith-empowered obedience in public and private places is the God-designed evidence of our love for Jesus. So there is a design as to how we operate. Our internal operating system is designed. And we have a default. And what's our default? Me, the guy in the mirror. Look out for number 1. That's my default. So we have to make a conscious choice to love someone other than me. And we have to choose that every single moment of every single day. You guys know what I'm talking about. You've dealt with this. You've been on the planet for a little while. So when we look into what we've learned here, we see that love, from John Bloom's quote, that love involves action, it involves obedience, and it involves faith. And we're going to explore that a little bit more today. So we're going to take a look at where are the places that we actually demonstrate this love, because we're looking for places that we have evidence for this love. So God's given us some unique roles as men. He's given us the role of being a husband. He's given us the role of being a father, given us the role of being a servant in the community. Whether we lead a business or we drive a bus or we deliver packages or whatever that may be, he gives us roles within our sphere of influence. So we're first going to start out with ourselves, because everything comes from within what we're thinking about and comes out in our own behavior. So we start with that, and then we're going to move into these other three spheres. So the first thing is that we need to make a conscious choice to pursue God. Our default is to make decisions that are really self-centric, just all about ourselves and what's best for me. So we have endless distractions from us pursuing an invisible God. God has chosen to be invisible, but yet we see evidence of his handiwork everywhere around us. But he's chosen to be invisible, so that makes it very difficult to always persistently and consistently pursue him. So it requires a real conscious choice that we have to intentionally be seeking his presence. So this is an exercise of our true free will. And as you know, God gave us that free will so we know that it's real. So that word real comes up again. Our love for God is real because we make a conscious choice to pursue him. So on your handout, I've written 5 scripture verses on this first topic. This first topic is that we need to pursue him first. So we're going to touch on just a couple of these, and you'll have this as reference in the future. So the bottom line is that a real man is plugged into God. He's making decisions based on God's wisdom, not our own direction. So Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." So we see that, there's some action verbs right here. Trust, lean not, and submit. So those I underline because those are our action verbs and what we're supposed to be doing. And they point to recognizing that God's in charge. And my attitude should be one of humility and submission throughout every single day. The second passage is 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And I want to talk about this one a little bit. It really points to the fact that we are to know God. We are to know his word, be aware of what it says, and put that into action. So do you have an owner's manual in your car? That's kept in the glove box, typically, right? But is it there right now, or is it somewhere else? So probably 100% of us would say that the manual is with the car. What's our manual for life? You may have heard this one before, BIBLE, basic instructions before leaving Earth. So are you keeping your owner's manual with the operator? So you keep your car manual in the car because you might need to reference it there. Have you ever read that owner's manual of your car cover to cover? No, most of us haven't. I got a new car a couple years ago, and I've referenced a couple of things in there because I didn't know how to do something, and I found it in the manual. So when we're trying to figure out how to do something in life, am I referencing the instruction manual, the owner's manual of life? And so really, maybe there's some new challenges for us here today. Have you decided maybe this new year I'm going to read the Bible cover to cover? Maybe you've done it before, but maybe you want to do it again. Maybe you want to do it in a new way. Maybe a chronological Bible that cuts up the Bible and places everything in time order, in historical order. That's a great way to read the Bible. So if you've not done that, I challenge you on that. Look up one on Amazon. It's like $14. So check that out. When we look at this verse, we see that we're guaranteed. There's promises here. There's guarantee of 5 things. You will be taught, you will be rebuked, you will be corrected, and you'll be trained in righteousness. And you'll be equipped. Those are great outcomes, right? Great outcomes. These last 3 verses in this section really talk about a personal relationship with God through Jesus Christ. And these personal relationships that you have with another human being, they always involve trust. They always involve some level of faith and belief and expectations. And it also comes into play as obedience. Think about the closest people to you in your family, maybe your wife. that involves all three of those things. And the same thing with God, a personal relationship involves those same three things: trust, faith, and obedience. So the bottom line is that I will be found listening to God. I will be found walking with him if I really do love him. So there's evidence of that real men do love Jesus and how we behave. The second area that we want to talk about is how we love our wives. So nearly 30 years ago, when I was thinking about marrying my girlfriend at the time, who is now my wife of 27 years, when I was thinking of that, my pastor saw me outside of church, and he said to me, he said, "Chris, do you love her?" It's like, that's kind of a dumb question. Of course I do. Yeah, I do. And he said to me, he had a follow-up question. And I wasn't expecting that because I was busy on my way, and being 20-something, I had things to do. He said, "Do you love her as much as you love yourself?" I said, "Whoa. I don't have a quick answer for that one." I had to think about that because I do love myself quite a bit. And he knew that. He knew that. He'd known me from being a teenager in high school, all through college. He'd seen me grow up. And so he hit me right between the eyes with that question. And it convicted me to recognize that marriage is a high calling. It's a super high calling. My older son is engaged to be married this year. And we've been talking a lot about that. One of the tips I've given him is that you're going to spend countless hours preparing for this one-day celebration, and countless dollars of her parents and me and my wife, So it's like, how many hours will you spend actually preparing for your lifetime of marriage during the same time period? I said, just put a little spreadsheet together, because he's a spreadsheet kind of guy. And it's like, put a spreadsheet together, count the hours and all of the activities on both sides of this ledger, and make sure that the hours that you spend preparing for a lifetime of marriage exceed the number of hours that you're preparing for this one-day event. So that's one of his checkpoints. My pastor, when he was really approaching me in this topic of, do I love my future wife as much as I love myself, he was really speaking of this verse. And this is the first verse on the list there. This is where Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus. He says, "In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself." Notice that order. "For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she is respected by her husband." So there's two terms here as Paul finishes this challenge: love and respect. So men need respect, and women need love. This is by God's design. If you look at what Dr. Emerson Eggerichs wrote in his book called Love and Respect, which is a New York Times bestseller, sold over 1 million copies. A few of you guys read that? You've seen that before. You've seen them perhaps in marriage conferences. It's outstanding material. And they're funny too. But there's 3 points that I've taken out of his book that really summarize the crux of his message. And speaking from our perspective as men in loving our wives, he says, every husband must make a decision about his wife's sensitivity and needs. He can close himself off and refuse to be open, in other words, go to his man cave, or he can move toward her and connect with her at new levels of openness. His second point, when she asks, "Do you love me?" she's not asking for information, she's asking for reassurance. And the third point, do everything you can to let your wife know that you're committed to her for as long as you both shall live. Those are 3 of his key points from that book. We'll take a look at what Peter says next. In his first letter, in 1 Peter 3:7, Peter says, "Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to the woman as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you of the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered." Notice the correlation there. Peter's challenging us as men. So a thriving relationship with God through our conversation, our prayer with God, it's dependent upon this relationship we have horizontally with our wives. God's pointing that out to us, that it's dependent on this relationship, that there's a strong correlation there. So let's not miss that. Next, let's take a look at the third element I want to point out is how evidence in how we love and lead our families. So there's evidence in how we lead our families. So I've been a father for going on 23 years, and it's the hardest job I've ever done. I've done a number of jobs on the planet, everything from mowing lawns and working at Taco Bell and department stores and working in a large corporate Fortune 50 company. And the hardest job I've ever done is being a father. Just when you figure out how to feed your children, change their diapers, the game changes again. The game is constantly moving. And before you know it, they're going to school, they're playing sports, they're playing an instrument, and you're bearing that with your ears. And then you're dealing with dating, then you're going through college phase, and all of this game is changing. And then you think you've got it mastered at some point with the first child, but then the second child comes along, and then you think you're gonna apply some of the things you learned from the first child to the second child, and you realize that the game's changed again. And some of it applies, but most of it doesn't. And you're learning the game all over again. So this is a very difficult job. It's a high calling to be a father and to lead your family. That's a high, high calling. So what are some key things that we can anchor on? So I've written down 4 of my favorite scripture verses when it comes to fatherhood. The first one, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Obviously easier said than done because they're provoking you to anger. And anger can fight anger, but that's not God's plan. And God knew that, so he says, don't provoke your children. So we need to be first in the word ourselves. If we're not in the word ourselves, the word cannot come out in our actions. We need to be able to teach our kids through our own actions. The second one is Proverbs 22:6. You've seen this one before. Train up a child in the way he should go. Even when he is old, he will not depart from it. It's not do as I say, not what I do, because you know that doesn't work. And if you've ever slipped with your language, you'll hear that language played back to you just like a mirror. And it's like, whoa, how'd they ever learn that? I wonder. You know exactly where they learned that. If you don't catch it at the moment, someone else will remind you. Next verse, 1 Timothy 5:8. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Whoa, Paul is calling it out right there. I mean, look at that contrast. But the word there is, the action word is provide. Provide what? I put food on the table. I put house over their head. I provided clothing, shelter. I provided all the basic needs. I'm a provider. I did what Paul said. He's talking about much more than that. You've got to be a spiritual provider, an emotional provider, a relational provider. You've not just a physical needs provider. You are the father. You must be the provider. And if you're not the provider, there's consequences. You can see it right there. You've denied the faith. Whoa, I didn't know I was denying the faith by my actions or lack of action. I didn't know that. Well, you know now. So now you're accountable. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Some of you have that on a plaque in your house. That's something that you've made a bold statement. You've said, this house, this belongs to God, and I am the leader of this house. I've been entrusted to lead this house. Joshua wrote that down in 24:15. So one of the things that's really helped me get grounded in learning how to be a father, especially a father of young children, was allprodad.com. So if you're a father and you have children living in your home right now, write that down, allprodad.com. The writers, the men at allprodad.com have helped me tremendously. They've given me lots of ideas on how to really build into these other things that I'm talking about, not just physical provision, but spiritual provision, emotional provision. And some of the basic things I learned there, do you know what your kid's favorite color is? Do you know who their favorite teacher is? Do you know who their best friend is? All these things change, just like the game keeps changing. But do you know what it is right now? And you're not going to find that out unless you really spend some time with them. And there's only a short period of time that you have. So all pro dad, and here's the other challenge with that. If you were to search one thing, search for 10 things, and this is the search criteria, 10 things that Scripture says about being a father. That'll blow your mind. That's good stuff. And this is their mission statement. It's our responsibility to train up a child in the way he should go, not the school, not the government, but you. You're the dad. That's their mission statement. I think it's kind of in your face and kind of bold, but I like it. It's right on, spot on. The last thing we're going to talk about is our love should be evident in how we serve in our communities. How we serve in our communities. So I've written 4 verses here that I really want to focus on. The first one is in John 15. This is where Jesus is speaking about the vine and the branches. He says that I'm the vine and you are the branches. So whoever abides in me, and what's the definition of abide? It's constant relationship, constant, not fragmented, not spotty, but constant relationship. That's what abide means. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. And apart from me, you can do nothing. He didn't say you can do something. You can do some things. You can do things on your own. No, the word is bold. It's nothing. You can do nothing. Now, who said this? Jesus himself. God said that. So as men, we're wired to be doers. We want to get things done. We want to bear much fruit. We do want to be productive. But Jesus warns us that if we're not in constant relationship with him, everything you're doing is just nothing. It's just nothing. So that puts it in real clear perspective. The next verse, you've heard this one many times too. This is Colossians 3:23 and 24. This one here says, whatever you do, whatever means that, again, you're delivering packages, you're driving a bus, you're leading an organization, you're the CEO, you're the president, whatever it is that you do, you need to work heartily as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. You are serving the Lord Christ. So when it comes to our work, you're not working for the man. Yeah, you got to do what the man says, but you're not working for the man. You're working for Christ directly. You report directly to Christ. So that's a very high calling as a leader. And I really like what John Maxwell, some of you have read some of his work on leadership. Some of you probably have some of his leadership books on your bookshelf. But what John Maxwell says, he says, what is your highest calling as a leader? What is your absolute highest calling as a leader? He says, well, I believe it's being a servant leader. So he distinguishes leader from servant leader. He says, I often teach that leaders, plain leaders, are going to ask the question, will I help people? But a servant leader asks, how will I help people? It's more specific, it's more actionable. How will I help people? So when you're a servant leader, you do so much more than just make people a priority. You look for specific opportunities to serve them and help them reach their fullest potential. There's a big difference between being a leader and being a servant leader. The next verse is Paul writing to the church in Galatia. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. He's very distinctly saying here that it's one or the other. Just like love of God, love of money, love of working for the man, or love of pleasing God. It's one or the other. You are not able to do both. You're not wired to do both. So if you're trying to do both, stop. You're wasting your time. You can't do both. We're not wired to be able to do both. So that is very clear to us instructionally this morning. The last verse I want to talk about is Mark 10. This is the story, and I'm not starting from the beginning, but in this story, this is where James and John are jockeying for position. They're talking to Jesus aside, and they're saying, Jesus, I hope there's a great place for us in the future. And then so the others are there. What are you guys talking to Jesus about? You guys are being pretty bold and cocky here. And so Jesus shares with them some very instructional information. He says here, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Notice the word great. I didn't circle that, but you might want to circle that. The word is great. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. So this last verse emphasizes another key word there, all. It doesn't say must be servant, must be slave of the people who like you. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say you must serve those people that love you, that respect you. It doesn't say that. It says all. So that means, when you're in line today at the checkout and the cashier is talking too much to the person and you're in a hurry and you begin getting impatient, that means that when you get up there, you're thinking about sharing a few words of managerial instruction on how to have a better work ethic and be more considerate of customers. But what this is telling us, I need to serve that cashier. And what would that look like? What would that look like if I was to serve that cashier who just upset me for me not being respected for my time in line? What does that look like? When I'm in the hurry to get to the airport and I'm already running late, and now there's a few accidents, and there's a guy who's driving the speed limit in lane number 1, when I buzz by him in lane number 2, after I've already flashed my lights a few times to try and get his attention to get out of lane number 1, and I recognize that he does have a Florida license plate, and I have a few more thoughts about this individual, and I want to share a nice gesture with him as I drive by out my left-hand window with my tall finger. How do I serve that person? What does that look like? That's what we're talking about here. I must be servant of all. So when we start to put God's word into practical application, we have to make deliberate choices. This is real. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the fact that real men, not fake men, real men love Jesus. And it's evident by our actions. So in review, we talked about the fact that we must seek him first. We must love our wives. We must lead our families, and we must serve our communities. So we got 4 action words. There it is right there. Seek, love, lead, serve. So if you want to get a tattoo today, that might be a good one. Seek, love, lead, serve. Okay? Seek, love, lead, serve. So on your handout, we've got 4 questions for you to break down at your table. The first 2 are really more discovery questions and level set questions, like where have you been in your thought process? So break that down at your table, spend a little bit of time there, talk about where you've been, talk about what you circled, what you underlined, what you highlighted in the Bible verses, what struck you today and caught your attention. Share that with the men at your table. You are doing life together with the men at your table. Share with them where you're at so they can pour some wisdom into you. And the last question, make sure you get to question 4. Question 4 is really about our practical application. It's about our best practices. Some of us are doing some of these actions, and you've caught a glimpse of how to live life according to God's will. And the rest of the guys at the table want to hear what you've been doing. And they want to hear what you've been doing. So this is about doing life together. So let's break and go to the tables, and we will come back in a little bit to wrap up. Guys, let's get back together again and huddle up. Just want to hear some of your best practices from the table. So question number 4 was share a best practice that helps you become a real man who loves Jesus all the time. So what's a best practice that maybe you guys heard at your table that's helping you do that? Some from the top deck. Best practice, Aaron. Good stuff. So Aaron says table time with the family, more times than not during the week. Excellent. What else? What's another good best practice that you guys heard about today? He said that anytime somebody says thank you, he monetizes that, and there's $10. So that's awesome. Yeah, make it real. What else? Anything else? Another best practice. That's awesome. Yep, spend that first hour with God. Daily quiet time. Men need that. Excellent best practice. All right. Well, I'm going to leave you guys with a quote from Bob Goff. And Bob Goff has written a book called Love Does, and also another book called Everybody Always. And if you're going to buy 2 books this year, I highly recommend those. And this is one thing that he says. He says, Jesus never had a problem with people who knew their shortcomings. He didn't tolerate people who faked it. Once we get real with where we actually are and our desperate need for him, he's got a person that he can do something with. Jesus never had a problem with people who knew their shortcomings, but he didn't tolerate people who faked it. So we've heard the 4-letter F word a couple of times today. This is about real men, not fake men. So Jesus doesn't tolerate men who fake it. And we're not going to be those men. So I encourage you to continue at your tables, hear each other's prayer requests, pray for one another, get deep in the Word, open up these scriptures again, see how they can really permeate your soul. Let's break to the tables and finish up with prayer. Thanks, guys.
One Thing for Men meets at Cabernet Steakhouse in Alpharetta, Georgia on Friday mornings from 7 to 8 a.m. If you live in the Atlanta area or visit the area on Friday, we would love to have you join us in person. And if you have been blessed by this message, please consider supporting One Thing for Men online.